I will now introduce our presenter. It's our collections manager, Erin Benz, who, if you've been with many of you, are familiar faces. And of course, you know Erin, she has co-hosted, she has presented in the past. And tonight she's going to talk about the origins of Valentine's Day. In addition to the history of the day, she'll share some of the holiday themed pieces from our collection. And we're going to hear about some local love stories from Montclair's past. So with that, I will, unless I left anything out, Angelica, I will hand it over to Erin.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'll just do one quick reminder. I'm just going to ask if everybody could mute their mic because we're only doing these History at Home nows at 7 o'clock. This will be the recording that's going to go up on YouTube. So, you know, if you don't want your face seen on YouTube, I also suggest turning off your camera, which is just the bottom left button that says stop video. That way your face won't be seen. Otherwise, it looks like everybody's muted, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm sure not everybody wants their dog forever immortalized barking on YouTube, so I appreciate it. So all right, well, yeah, we're going to get started. Let me do my little screen share here. All right, let me get my PowerPoint going here. All right. So, and we're going to have time for questions at the end, I'll mention too. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box and or we can, you know, always save them for the end. So, but yeah, so we're going to dive into a little bit of Montclair history here, focusing more on Valentine's Day. So I got a few Montclair couples that immediately came to mind when it came when the idea of a Valentine's Day or February History at Home, the idea was kind of being thrown around. I immediately had a handful of couples from Montclair's history that really embodied the holiday for me. So I want to make a PowerPoint around it, but we're going to start actually with talking about the history of the holiday, just get a little bit of that background before we dive into the more specific Montclair history. So we're going to do a very brief, and I promise it is very brief, history of Valentine's Day. So the day starts many centuries ago with the Feast of Lupercalia. And I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right. I'm not fluent in Latin, but I think it's Lupercalia, which was celebrated from February 13th to 15th in Rome. It was named after the Luperci, an order of Roman priests. Men sacrificed a goat for fertility and a dog for purification. Then they used their hides to whip women in the belief it would make them fertile. The women were very part of this. They welcomed it as well. So they were part of this ceremony as well. The festivities included a matchmaking lottery in which young men drew the names of women from a jar. The man and woman would then be coupled up for the duration of the festival or longer if it was a good match. Now, more specifically, Valentine. Who was Valentine? Where does that come from? Well, the Catholic Church actually recognizes at least 3 different saints named Valentine or Valentinus, all of whom were killed on or around February 14th and were martyred. So the first one is who was a priest. His name was Valentine. He was a priest who served during the 3rd century in Rome, when Emperor Claudius II decided that single men made better soldiers than those with wives and families. He outlawed marriage for young men. Valentine, realizing the injustice of the decree, continued to perform marriages for young lovers in secret. When Valentine's actions were discovered, Claudius ordered that he be put to death. So that's Valentine number 1. Valentine number 2 was the first bishop of Tierney. When visiting Rome, it said he tried to convert Claudius to Christianity. That was a mistake. This enraged Claudius, who tried to get Valentine to renounce his faith. The martyr refused, so the emperor ordered him beaten with clubs and stones and subsequently executed him. So 2 against Claudius. Now he's not looking too good in this story. Third Valentine may have been killed for attempting to help Christians escape harsh Roman prisons where they were often beaten and tortured. According to one legend, an imprisoned Valentine actually sent the first Valentine greeting after he fell in love with a young girl, possibly his jailer's daughter, who visited him during his confinement. Before his death, it's alleged that he wrote her a letter signed "From your Valentine." There's that phrase that comes in. This picture here actually depicts the death of one of those Valentines. It's unclear which one, but it's at least one of those Valentines there. As with many pagan celebrations, the Feast of Lupercalia was adapted into Valentine's Day in order to convert the heathens, quote unquote heathens, possibly also to commemorate the death of Valentine. Could have been one or the other, maybe a little bit of both. It's hard to say. Pope Gelasius I turned the festival into a more theatrical interpretation of what it had once been. For example, while the Romans conducted the festival while naked, the Christians put clothes on. The day continued to be very much about fertility and love. Around the same time, the Normans celebrated Galentine's Day, very close sounding. Galantin meant lover of women. That was likely confused with St. Valentine's Day at some point, in part because they sound so much alike. Galantin, Valentine, kind of that. As the years went on, the holiday grew sweeter. Chaucer and Shakespeare romanticized it in their works. Chaucer was actually the first to record St. Valentine's Day as a day of romantic celebration in his 1375 poem, Parliament of Fowls, writing, "For this was sent on St. Valentine's Day, when every fowl cometh there to choose his mate." The celebration of the day gained much popularity throughout Britain and the rest of Europe during this time. Handmade paper cards came into fashion during the Middle Ages, which was the height of St. Valentine's popularity. The people of the Middle Ages also thought that February 14th was the beginning of birds' mating season. As early as the 15th century in England, men wrote amorous addresses to their lady love. A legend said that a young lady was supposed to eventually marry the first male she met on St. Valentine's Day. Now, not everyone viewed expressions of love as something that should be celebrated. The Puritans in New England did not allow any public displays of affection on any day of the year. Great examples when Captain Kemble of Boston, in a burst of passion, kissed his wife in public. Oh gosh, shocking. Because of this, he was sentenced to 2 hours in the stocks for, quote, lewd and unseemly behavior. The kicker, the captain had just returned from a 3-year voyage, so you'd think he would have had the right to kiss his wife after that time. Now, by the middle of the 18th century, it was common for friends and lovers of all social classes to exchange small tokens of affection or handwritten notes. Americans probably began exchanging handmade valentines in the early 1700s, featuring such designs as cupids, hearts, lovers' knots, and turtle doves. In the 1840s, Esther A. Howland began selling the first mass-produced valentines in America. Howland, known as the mother of the Valentine, first made elaborate creations with real lace, ribbons, and colorful pictures known as scrap. And actually, here's a sample of one of her valentines. By 1900, printed cards began to replace written letters due to improvements in printing technology. Ready-made cards were an easy way for people to express their emotions in a time when direct expression of one's feelings was discouraged. Cheaper postage rates also contributed to an increase in the popularity of sending Valentine's Day greetings. And in 1913, we get Hallmark Cards of Kansas City, Missouri, begin mass producing Valentines. Now today, we have approximately 145 million cards exchanged on Valentine's Day every year. Kind of a variation on the Valentine's Day card. We see school kids bringing in Valentine's Day cards with their favorite movie or TV characters, putting them in their fellow schoolmates' boxes that I'm sure they hand make, and they decorate each of their own during the school day, and everybody gets a Valentine. Now, with chocolate, there's $729 million in chocolate sales during this holiday. Jewelry sales jumped nearly 40%, and 85% of flowers purchased are roses during this time. Now, speaking of chocolate, roses, and all that, I'm just going to dive a little bit into the traditions of, where these traditions come from. First, I want to show a couple of Valentine's Day examples. So this card in the top left corner is actually one of the oldest Valentine's Day cards ever found. It's found in England, and they think it dates back to about 1790. The front says, "Farewell, you sweet and turtle dove, on you alone I fixed my love, and if you never can be mine, I never can no comfort find." And then the bottom right is actually a Valentine I had never heard of. It's a series of Valentines called vinegar Valentines, which you sent specifically to people you did not like. So I just thought there's a whole series of these vinegar Valentines that I found. This one I just liked because it really brings home the sourness with that lemon there. You just immediately looking at it go, okay, this is a vinegar Valentine just by looking at it. And then of course I had to include a shot of the Valentine's Day aisle today. I took this at Walmart the other day, and it really just shows you the variety of characters you can now get as Valentines, kind of see what's popular with the kids these days by looking at these Valentines as well. Now into the traditions now. So first, kissing. Now, kissing, of course, is done year round. It's done all over the world. But have you ever thought about, where does kissing come from? Humans are really the only species that kiss. There are other animals where we've seen instances of kissing, but humans are really rare in that occurrence where we're the only ones that really kiss. So I kind of looked into it a little bit. Now, the earliest mentions of kissing are in the Vedic Sanskrit scriptures from about 1500 BC. So it goes back quite a while there. Kissing continued to be mentioned in Indian and Hindu literature from there, and then it kind of spreads all throughout the world in terms of it being written down and having a record of kissing being a thing with humans. This picture is actually a historic moment. This is a shot from Edison's short film, The Kiss, from 1896. It's the first kiss caught on film. So it's pretty unique. This is actually, you can find it on YouTube. If you go search Edison's The Kiss, you can watch the whole thing. I think it's very short. It's literally just seconds long, but you can go watch it on YouTube. Now, next, more specific to Valentine's Day, we have Cupid. The Roman god Cupid has its roots in Greek mythology as the Greek god of love, Eros. According to his birth, accounts of his birth vary. Some say he's the son of Nyx and Erebus, others of Aphrodite and Ares, others suggest he's the son of Eris and Zephyrus, or even Aphrodite and Zeus. According to the Greek archaic poets, Eros was a handsome immortal who played with the emotions of gods and men, using golden arrows to incite love and leaden ones to sow aversion. It wasn't until the Hellenistic period that he began to be portrayed as the mischievous, chubby child we know on Valentine's Day cards today, like this little guy. Next, chocolate. Of course, I had to show off Hershey's Kiss here, of course, for Valentine's Day. While chocolate drinks date back centuries, solid chocolate only goes back to about 1847, when British chocolate maker J.S. Fry and Sons produced the first modern day chocolate bar. Not long after, in 1861, did chocolate get connected with Valentine's Day, thanks to Richard Cadbury. You may know Cadbury today. He launched fancy boxes of chocolates in 1861, and by 1868, those boxes were now heart-shaped. They were very popular with the Victorians, who used those boxes to store love letters, lockets of hair, and other treasured mementos. Milton Hershey started as a caramel maker, but in 1894 began covering his caramels with sweet chocolate. In 1907, Hershey launched production of teardrop-shaped kisses, so called because of the smooching noise the chocolate made as it was manufactured. Kisses became a hit, being able to be mass-produced at an affordable cost. And then finally, Russell Stover. It began with a woman named Clara Stover, who started wrapping bungalow candies in her Denver kitchen in 1923. She and her husband moved to Kansas City and opened several factories selling their Valentine's chocolates in heart-shaped boxes to department stores across the Midwest. And I actually found a study that, as of a few years ago, Russell Stover was the largest seller of chocolate boxes in the country, which kind of shocked me. I thought it would have been a more different company, but I guess if you think about it, Russell Stover chocolate boxes are probably one of the most common chocolate boxes you see in the store today. Lastly, roses. Now, the red rose first emerged in Greek and Roman iconography, where it was tied to Aphrodite, or Venus, the goddess of love. In Greek mythology, it's said that rose bushes grew from the ground through Aphrodite's tears and the blood of her lover Adonis. Later, in early Christian times, it was associated with the virtue of Virgin Mary. Now, Lady Mary, a different Lady Mary, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, wife of a British ambassador to Turkey during the 1700s, brought the idea of assigning meaning to flowers to the West. She was exposed to the Turkish flower language, or the process of assigning certain symbolic meanings to certain flowers. She misinterpreted the local custom, which had more to do with rhyming words than the significance of the flowers themselves. But despite this, the concept of flower language caught on, and during the Victorian era, roses became ever more tightly linked to romantic love. During this time, Victorians used floral bouquets to deliver a message to love interests. The system was called floriography and officially solidified the red rose's romantic status. Now, more practically, why the red rose is popular? Well, it looks beautiful, it smells great, and it actually travels really well. So it just makes it a very practically perfect pick to be very popular during Valentine's Day. They may also know that not just flowers, but different colored roses have different meaning as well. So of course, the traditional red represents passion. The pink rose stands for appreciation and grace. The yellow one conveys friendship and happiness, and the white one implies innocence. Now, I also want to show a few things from the Montclair History Center's archives as well that was tied to Valentine's Day. So first, we just have a couple of newspaper articles here. The top one, Valentine Sweets for that special person in your life, was from a copy of the Herald we have from 2006. The one in the bottom right is a bit older. It's from the Glendorian from 1936. And it's just talking about a Valentine's Day party held for the teachers by the principal. Next, these pieces here, we've got some poems and some imagery here. These are from some Montclair Women's Club magazines that we have in our collection. It's called Quest. These two, the one on the left is from 1939. The one on the right is from 1950. And then this double spread here. This is from 1958. I just love the imagery, especially the top left one of that beautiful silhouette there. And then, of course, in our collection, we have so many Valentines here. They're all in our collection here. Let me back up so you guys can see these a little bit better. So you may recognize the one on the right from our promotional material. It's a little hard to tell in the picture, but the sticks, the batons that the couple is carrying are actual wooden sticks input into the card. So it's got this kind of cool 3D effect on the card there. I've got this little one here. It's just a little skinny card. The only thing written on the back was handwritten by the person who gave the card. It says, "Guess who?" kind of a little cute little message there. We've got this schoolgirl, school age girl, at a table here. This one, I love this one because it's a card in the shape of a letter and an envelope. I just love that kind of like meta, double, got a lot of going on there. A couple more here. The inside basically says, I don't need a doctor. All I need is you, which is not sound medical advice. I'm going to say that right now. It's not sound. So I would not follow that card. A couple more cards here. I love the teacup one. It's just gorgeous. It's got the flowers on that cart, and the teacup ones are also raised a little bit, like it's just kind of indented. So it's kind of got that added, texture feel to it, to the cards too. So these are all about 1948 to 1952. All of them, except for the school age girl one, these all came from one collection and that we have in our archives. So, all right, now we're getting to the good stuff here. Now we start to dive into some couples from Montclair's history. So I'm going to start with one of the earliest couples from Montclair's history that I could think of, and that was Lucy Stone and Henry Blackwell. If you know women's suffrage, Lucy Stone may come to mind. The name Blackwell may sound familiar too. Well, I'll get into that in just a second. So Lucy was born in 1818 in Massachusetts. She was the first Massachusetts woman to earn a college degree. She went to Oberlin College in Ohio, the country's first college to admit both women and African Americans. Unfortunately, when she went to graduate, she wasn't allowed to give a commencement speech in front of the class of men and women because as a woman, it was deemed inappropriate for her to speak to an audience of men. Instead, she was offered the honor of writing a speech that would then be delivered by a man. Needless to say, she declined that offer. Soon after, Lucy went around the country and even went around Canada, making speeches about abolition and women's rights. Now, Henry was born in 1825 in England. His family emigrated to the United States in 1832, first settled in New York, where Henry's father became interested in the abolitionist movement, and Henry's eldest sister became involved in the women's suffrage movement. After the Panic of 1837, the family moved to Cincinnati. Henry, throughout his life, dabbled at a few different business ventures, including clerking, flour mills, sugar refining, and hardware. Now, Lucy had initially stated she would never marry due to the rights she would lose and the obedience she was expected to give her husband. However, Henry, who was 7 years Lucy's junior, became infatuated with Lucy after hearing her speak at an anti-slavery meeting in New York in May 1853. Took 2 years of talking and letter writing and Henry swearing to never restrict Lucy's rights. I mean, after all, he did come from a very forward-thinking family. And eventually Lucy fell in love with Henry as well. The two married on May 1st, 1855. Several unique features to the wedding. Lucy, first off, kept her name. A lot of women after this time who kept their original name were called Lucy Stoners, in fact. They took out the word obey from their vows. And lastly, they published a formal protest pamphlet arguing for equality in marriage, which underscored the legal restrictions married women endured at this time, which included a wife was not entitled to her own person, guardianship of children, ownership of real estate or her own wages, nor could she inherit property in most circumstances. Now, upon hearing that Lucy would be keeping her name, fellow women's rights activist Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, "Nothing has been done in the women's rights movement for some time that so rejoiced my heart as the announcement by you of a woman's right to her name. To take a name is one of the first steps in freedom and one of the first demands in a Republican government." A couple of years later, in 1857, the couple gave birth to a daughter, Alice, and moved to Orange, New Jersey. Where they took equal ownership of a house, interestingly. Now, they didn't stay long because when taxes came around, Lucy refused to pay. I mean, I don't blame her. No taxation without representation. She wasn't allowed to vote, so why should she have to pay taxes? Unfortunately, in the end, they had to pay off the tax and attendant court costs by selling off their furniture in a public auction. Luckily, they had some very nice neighbors at the time who bought a lot of that furniture in order to give it back to the family. This ended up just leaving a bad taste in Lucy and Henry's mouths. So they ended up moving to Montclair just a year later, buying property actually under Lucy's name. They then lived in Montclair for the next 3 years, and that is their house at 118 North Mountain Avenue there in the bottom right corner. Now, Lucy and Henry would go on to found the American Women's Suffrage Association after there was a split in the women's suffrage movement. This happened over the ratification of the proposed 14th Amendment, which guaranteed equal protection of the laws to all citizens, regardless of race, color, creed, or previous condition of servitude, but it added the word male to the Constitution for the first time. And over the proposed 15th Amendment, which extended franchise to African-American men, but not women. So Lucy and Henry founded the American Women's Suffrage Association in 1869 and began publishing the Women's Journal in 1870. Lucy's friend, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony formed a rival organization, the National Women's Suffrage Association, which focused more on women's rather than universal suffrage and used more intense tactics like voting illegally, which got many members thrown in jail. Lucy and Henry's organization focused more on universal suffrage, had both men and women in the leadership roles, and was considered more conservative. So it was actually more popular to begin with than Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony's organization. That soon changed over time. But by the 1890s, the women's suffrage movement reconciled and formed the National American Women's Suffrage Association, with Lucy and Henry's daughter Alice playing a significant role. Alice became the editor of the Women's Journal, which was the primary national journal for the suffrage movement until it ceased publication in 1931. Lucy and Henry both died in Boston, Lucy in 1893 and Henry in 1909. I just want to read a little bit from their obituary. So this little brief snippet from Lucy's obituary here just kind of really tells you the impact she had on the women's suffrage movement. It says, "The young people of this generation cannot properly appreciate the persistent courage displayed by Lucy Stone and her sister women's rights agitators when they started out in that movement 40 years ago. All the prejudices of society were against them. They were looked upon as monsters, as women who had unsexed themselves, and as enemies of every conservative social institution. They were jeered, hooted, mobbed, and insulted. Lucy Stone was a name of derision. She was despised and objurgated. The sight of a woman as a speaker on a public platform or as an officer of a public meeting provoked astonishment and contempt. At this time, when every right advocated by Lucy Stone is granted to women and is exercised by them as a matter of course, such unreasonable and tumultuous opposition at a period so recent seems inconceivable." And then in Henry's obituary that was published in the Boston Evening Transcript, they actually have a little description of Henry and Lucy's marriage. Starts off with his marriage. Don't love that. But his marriage more than 50 years ago to Lucy Stone at that time was one of the best known leaders in the women's suffrage movement, possessed some of the features of romance, and never did husband redeem his prenuptial pledges more thoroughly than he. And the union of interest and service, as well as of affection, was a long and happy one. Both Henry and Lucy, interestingly, are cremated. You can find their remains in the Forest Hills Cemetery and Crematory in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. Lucy, of course, the first in many, many things. She was also the first person to be cremated in Massachusetts. Now, a couple of images here I want to show you guys. Here's just a few more images of Lucy and Henry. So that is Lucy depicted in her practical bloomers, just an outfit that allowed her a bit more freedom of movement, but was deemed very shocking for the time for a woman to be wearing. Top right corner, we have Henry. And in the middle here, we have Lucy with Henry and Lucy's daughter, Alice, there as a little baby. This is the protest pamphlet that they published at the time of their wedding in 1855. This is a reprint from 1897, but just little overview here you guys can see here. If you're watching on YouTube later, you can always take a pause here and look at it later, but I've got a lot more to get through, so I've got to keep going. But lastly, I just want to show the 118 North Mountain House here one more time. That is some Blackwell family members there. We're going to hear that name a little bit later on today. But I just give you a little snippet here. Now, next, we're going to move on to a couple that you may or may not know, Maud and Ballington Booth. Now, Ballington Booth was born in 1857 in England. His father, William Booth, was the founder of the Salvation Army in England. Ballington was 6'4", a riveting speaker, and described as cheerful. Maud was also born in England in 1865. By the time she was grown, she was barely 5 feet tall, described as beautiful yet shy. Her mother was interested in social welfare, and so brought Maud at age 16 to a Salvation Army holiness meeting where she met Ballington. Maud soon fell in love with Ballington, but both sets of parents objected to the affair. Maud's parents, the Charlesworths, were objected to the affair mostly because they were higher up in society than the Booths were. But Maud pursued Ballington anyway. When Maud's mom passed away, her father decided a trip to Europe would cheer her up. Maud traveled to Sweden and Switzerland, where she, interestingly, I found conflicting accounts. Some say purposefully, others say it was a total coincidence that she ran across Ballington's sister, Catherine, who was doing mission work there. Now, Ballington during this time was sent to run the Salvation Army in Australia, but as soon as he came back to England, Maud started to pursue him again. At the age of 21, she married Ballington. At this point, Maud's father disowned her officially, and she ended up never reconciling with her father. Ballington's father, William, however, came around to accepting their marriage, and he sent the young couple to run the Salvation Army in the United States, which was headquartered in New York City. Maud soon took on both of Ballington's name, not just his last name. She actually ended up going by Maud Ballington Booth. She once said, "There are many Booths, but there's only one Ballington, and I belong to him." They initially lived in New York, then moved to Jersey City, and by 1891, they moved to Montclair. Initially, they lived at 271 Claremont Avenue, which was later used as the volunteer rescue home. It's actually still around today. It's pictured there at the bottom. They then moved to a larger home at 182 South Mountain and lived there for about 1900 to 1917. That house is no longer standing, but I'll show you some pictures of it in a little bit. Due to Maud and Ballington's public speaking skills and connections, the Salvation Army in America grew in numbers and became fiscally sound. Around this time, the two also had 2 children, Charles and Theodora. Now, when Ballington's father, William, visited the United States, according to Maud and Ballington in 1896, William decided that the Salvation Army under Ballington's care was too American. One account I found said that very specifically, Ballington did not appreciate how much the American flag was just flown and waved everywhere across the country. He just thought that was a bit too nationalistic for his taste. The disagreement was a big deal at the beginning of the 20th century, even making the papers. It resulted in Ballington and Maud splitting from the Salvation Army, or according to them, kicked out, and they ended up forming the Volunteers of America. The argument ran deep, however. They had initially named their son William after Balington's father, but they actually changed his name to Charles just to spite William. It wasn't until the Salvation Army, it wasn't just the Salvation Army that the couple was interested in, however. In the 1890s, after a visit to Sing Sing prison, Maud was moved to reform the prison system here in America. She gave speeches and started a prison league that encouraged reform during a time when prison was just seen as a place of punishment. This became a mission of hers for the rest of her life. In 1896, she opened in the Bronx what is believed to be the first halfway house for released prisoners. She was also a founding member of the Parent Teachers Association and was a supporter of the women's suffrage movement. Now, after Balington died in 1940, Maud was chosen to lead the volunteers until her death 8 years later, at which point their son Charles took over. They are both buried in Ferncliff Cemetery and Mausoleum in Hartsdale, New York. Now, when I say this argument between Balington and his father William made the papers, I'm not kidding. You can see these are just a few samples. I did a quick search and there were thousands of results about Balington and his disagreement with his father from across the country. So you can see I've got a couple of newspapers closer to home in Vineland and Camden. There's also, this news made it all the way to Chicago and even California. You can see the San Francisco Call there in the center there. So this argument really was pretty big for the time and really made papers. And it was a very much he said, not so much he said, she said, more like he said, but it's never made clear who was right, who was wrong in this. But yeah. This is just a newspaper clipping I found from the Montclair Times that just specifically mentions their home at 271 Claremont. For the holidays, Maud is just asking that people donate clothing and donate blankets and stuff to give to the lesser. So I just thought this is kind of a cool little detail here. Here is the home that is no longer around anymore. This is 182 South Mountain. You can actually see, so the far right map clipping, that's from our 1906 map. You can see it says Maud B. Booth there, and you can actually see just how far back the house is from the street. That's the street there at the very bottom of the map. It goes back pretty far. So they had a massive front lawn there. I believe the house was torn down, I want to say in the 1920s. So it's no longer there, unfortunately. All right, now we're moving on to another name you may recognize, the Gilbreths. You may know their story from the 1948 book written by Frank and Lillian's children, Frank Butler Jr. and Ernestine Gilbreth Carey, entitled Cheaper by the Dozen, which spurred the 1950 movie. Or if you're a millennial like me, you may better know the 2003 and 2005 Steve Martin version of Cheaper by the Dozen. Lillian Mahler was born in Oakland, California. She attended the University of California, having to convince her parents to go at first, though, but she persevered. She majored in English Lit. She went on to receive her master's in English Lit from Berkeley and immediately began a doctoral programs in literature and psychology. She was a self-described plain Jane, was slim and shy, and by age 25, she had never been on an unescorted date with a man. Shocking. Frank was born in Maine and raised in Boston. By age 17, he had already started work as a bricklayer's apprentice, soon rising to the top of his company. By age 26, he had gone into business for himself, and by age 28, he was one of the best-known building contractors in the world. He was also becoming known for his work on discovering the one best way to accomplish tasks through motion studies. Today, it's called efficiency studies. Frank was described as sandy-haired, outgoing, a fashionable dresser, and an incredibly energetic bachelor. These two opposites met in June 1903 in Boston when Lillian was en route to Europe. And as one Montclair Times article would say later, Cupid began to work with more than usual speed and efficiency, appropriate for the Gilbreths. So here's a little quote now. I found this very cute story from Frank Bunker Gilbreth's book, Time Out for Happiness, where he describes how his father would describe how the two of them met. It goes, "Did I ever tell you how I first happened to meet your mother?" He'd ask us loudly for her benefit. Of course, he told us 100 times, but we liked to see mother blush when he teased her, so we'd always reply that it was news to us. Well, I was driving along the streets of Boston in my new buzz wagon, a Winton 6, when I saw this red-haired, blonde, mother interposed. The strawberry blonde baby doll standing on a corner and looking kind of lonesome. I don't know what was the matter with that Winton, but whenever it approached a cunning baby doll, it used to swerve to the curb and stop. We told him that we'd bet he was the one who made the car swerve and stop, but that he couldn't josh us. I'm not joshing, he continued. Now, if I do say so myself, I was a pretty handsome fellow in those days. I was thin as a rail, not covered in muscle as I am today. Oh, yes, indeedy, mother nodded. Anyway, after the buzz wagon stopped, this baby doll stepped up to the running board, flashed me a come hither smile, and cooed, "Hello there, Mr. Man. Say, that's a mighty nifty automobile. What about a little ride, dearie?" And what did you say, Daddy? Well, naturally, my mother taught me not to talk to strange women, and especially never to get in an automobile with one. So I politely suggested to the redhead that she skidoo, but she winked at me, and so it went. So the real story is a little different from that, as you can imagine. Lillian was actually introduced to Frank through her chaperone, Minnie Bunker, who was Frank's cousin. At that time, Lillian, being an unmarried woman going on a big adventure to Europe, would have needed a chaperone in order to go. So Minnie Bunker was that chaperone. Frank ended up driving the two of them around Boston for a few days. So there is a car involved. He got that part of the story, right? Which is where the two of them got to know each other. After her return from Europe in November, Frank met Lillian at the dock. The next day, Frank took Lillian to the Met, but was so late in picking her up that she almost refused to go. He later confessed that he was late because he had been quizzing her friends about her true feelings about him. Aww. Frank followed the family back to California on the guise, but maybe real, excuse he had business out there. The day after Christmas, Frank proposed to Lillian while they sat together overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. They married in 1904 in Oakland, California. The wedding was in the Mahler's drawing room with only 2 guests outside of the immediate family in attendance. Now, Lillian and Frank were partners in work as well as in their domestic life. There's a great quote here from Jane Lancaster's Making Time book, where she describes their marriage. It says, "The Gilbreths represented their marriage as a business arrangement, not in the old impersonal way of an arranged alliance between wealthy families, but in one in which the family was an economic unit with the husband and wife as productive partners. They believed that tasks should be assigned rationally by skill. They aimed to maximize the efficiency and profitability, in whatever terms that was to be measured, of the family unit. They invented their own style of partnership. Frank called Lillian boss while signing his letters, your chum. Lillian explained that they preferred to pull all their assets into the partnership and meet the world as a firm." Now, a little bit late, here we go. Lillian had the education. It was a great partnership because Lillian had the education and writing skills to write and publish their studies. And with her at his side, Frank gave up his building work and focused on improving efficiency in the workplace. Their reputation as management consultants and their family continued to grow. With the help of Frank's mother and several domestic workers, Lillian was able to devote a significant amount of time to her work. She soon changed schools and changed her doctoral program to the science of management. She earned her PhD from Brown University with a dissertation titled The Psychology of Management in 1915, which Frank actually helped publish. Frank was more interested in the processes that improved efficiency, while Lillian was interested in how workers responded to the work. Together, they looked at the most efficient ways to lay bricks, make soap, wash dishes, brush teeth, just to name a few. To be closer to New York City, they moved their family from Rhode Island to 68 Eagle Rock Way in Montclair in 1919. Oh, and here they come. They applied their efficiency skills to their home, developing the Gilbreth system, which was immortalized in the book, Cheaper by the Dozen. Now, just to give you some context, they had 13 children in 17 years. Unfortunately, one child did die at the age of 5. Another one died miscarriage. But there was at one point 6 boys and 6 girls. Pretty efficient number there. The last Gilbreth child actually died in 2015, so not too long ago. Frank himself, unfortunately, died in 1924 while talking to Lillian from a telephone booth at Lackawanna train station on his way to New York City. They had been scheduled to speak in Europe shortly after his death, and Lillian, realizing the business was now in her hands and knowing that she, as a woman, had to prove she was up to the task, boarded a ship just days after his death to attend the conference. Now, after his death, Lillian continued to consult, research, and write. She taught at Purdue University, the New York College of Engineering, and the University of Wisconsin. She began to apply their motion studies and management ideas to the home. She introduced the concept of the work triangle in the kitchen, the foot pedal trash can, and even the egg keeper and butter tray on refrigerator doors. Lillian was a trailblazer in the engineering world. She was the first woman elected to the National Academy of Engineers, the second woman elected to the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and the first woman to receive the Hoover Award, which is given by 5 engineering organizations recognizing
That's what I'm
great,
trying to do now.
unselfish, non-technical services by engineers to humanity. She's included in Who's Who in American Women, Notable American Women, and interestingly, American Men of Science. While in Montclair, in addition to the Eagle Rock address, which she lived at until 1945, she also lived at 30 The Crescent, 510 Highland Avenue, and 215 Fernwood Avenue. Lillian died in 1972. Although she died in Arizona, there was a memorial service for her here at First Congregational, and the Montclair Times dedicated nearly half a page, a whole half of a page, just to her obituary. She had that many accomplishments, and honestly, I could do a whole history at home just on her accomplishments alone. I think this is kind of romantic and very sentimental. Both Frank and Lillian had their ashes scattered at sea, so they don't have a burial plot. They just decided to scatter their ashes at sea together. Now, here is that famed Gilbreth house. So this was the house at 68 Eagle Rock Way. I believe there is a 68 Eagle Rock Way there today. It's not the same house, it's a different house. This was actually torn down in about the 1940s, 1950s at the request of Lillian. I believe only the carriage house of this structure remains today, actually. Now, when the Gilbreths bought the house in 1919, Frank christened it Mostulab, short for Motion Studies Laboratory. Not surprising, that name did not stick. I don't think really anybody used that name, whether inside or outside the family. Just a couple of newspaper articles here. I found some fun ones. This one says, Jersey has world's only efficiency family. They live up in Montclair. This was published in the Courier Post in 1921. So you can see Frank and Lillian there with their children. And then I just love this image. There's Frank there on a seesaw against all of his children, clearly not standing a chance there against all of his children. And then lastly, this is actually from our collection here. We have a few pieces related to this stamp series, but basically in 1984, Lillian Gilbreth was recognized by the U.S. Postal Service with a commemorative stamp in the Great American Series. So I have a few pieces from the stamp series in our collection. I just like this one. It's a very striking image of Lillian there. All right, so we're going to a couple a bit more recent in time, Olympia Dukakis and Louis Zorich. Now, Louis Zorich was born in 1924 in Chicago. He studied drama at the Goodman Theater. His first movie was The Double Cure from 1958, and one of his first major roles was playing the constable in Fiddler on the Roof in 1971. He also played Paul Reiser's father in the sitcom Mad About You from 1993 to 1999. Olympia was born in 1931 in Lowell, Massachusetts. Interestingly, she did not start in theater. She graduated from Boston University with a BA in physical therapy and practiced as a physical therapist during the polio epidemic. She later returned to Boston University and earned a Master of Fine Arts. She's known for her roles in Steel Magnolias, Look Who's Talking, and probably most famously as Cher's mom in Moonstruck, for which she won Best Supporting Actress in 1988. At this time, she was living in Montclair, and actually Montclair threw a parade for her after her Oscar win. And if you're ever wondering, yes, she is related to 1988 Democratic presidential candidate Michael Dukakis. They are cousins. Now, Louis and Olympia met at the audition for The Opening of a Window, an off-Broadway play. Funnily enough, Louis was auditioning for the role of Olympia's husband. Aww. Olympia said, I was to be a wife with a sickly husband who died at the end of the first act. Well, Louis looked too healthy and handsome and seemed incapable of dying. He was really hot, though that was a term we didn't use then. The two got married in 1962, just a year after meeting. They moved to Montclair in 1970 to raise their kids, and they lived at 222 Upper Mountain Avenue, which you can see there at the bottom. The two co-founded the Whole Theater here in Montclair in 1971. In 1987, Olympia described the company as the kind of catalyst which helps people to realize their own creativity. The theater was even nominated for a Tony in 1986. Unfortunately, it closed in 1990 after cutbacks to federal funding. And Olympia would say later, we had some good times. It meant a lot to me, that theater, that company, that audience, and to make me feel wanted. Now, after Olympia's Oscar win in 1988, the award ended up benefiting both Louis and her. Olympia, who was used to only being offered more, quote, ethnic roles due to her Greek background, started getting more requests and more popular roles. Louis, who's used to having to take any role he could get to make money, including many commercials, was able to be a bit choosier with his roles and play roles that he actually wanted to do. When asked about his success to marriage in 2010, Louis said, "We just said to ourselves that one to the other, that I'm there for you and you're there for me." He continued, "If she wanted to go to Hollywood and do a movie, I say do it. If I want to go away on Broadway, you go do it." In a later interview about how the couple have managed to make it work in Hollywood, Louis said, "I have a great respect for her talent, number one, and I think she respects my talent, and we allow each other a lot of room." Olympia continued, "First of all, we love each other. Second, we've been very good partners, colleagues, and friends." The Courier News in 1988 quoted, the couple said, quote, "Never lock themselves into the provider slash nurturer, male slash female, mother slash father roles that society pressed for. With both serving in their roles as they see fit, they have reached equilibrium. Now the only roles they consciously drape themselves in are on the stage." They lived in Montclair until 1995, when their last child graduated from high school here. They decided to move back to Manhattan. In 2019, a documentary of her life entitled Olympia premiered at the Montclair Film Festival. Louis died in 2018, and Olympia died only a couple of years ago, back in 2021. They are actually both buried in Mount Hebron Cemetery, so you can go visit their graves up in Mount Hebron Cemetery there today. Couple of clippings I got here. So the clipping on the left is actually for the first production that they did at the Whole Theater. That's from 1972 there. And then the clipping on the right is from a production they did together at the Whole Theater from 1988. Now, interestingly, the couple rarely performed together for a couple of reasons. One, they both needed to like the role that they would have been playing. And second, they would have, the idea of working together, that can add a lot of stress. So they would only choose select pieces that they wanted to play and that they knew they could do well together. Now, next, I'm fast forwarding to an even more modern couple, and actually a couple that still live in Montclair today, Stephen Colbert and Evelyn McGee. Now, you may know Stephen Colbert from his show, The Colbert Report, and his current role as the late night show host. He was born in 1964 in Washington, D.C., the youngest of 11 kids. Cheaper by the dozen, anybody. He lived most of his childhood in Charleston, South Carolina. Evelyn was born in 1963 and in Charleston, and is the daughter of prominent Charleston civil litigator Joseph McGee. Now, according to People magazine, before meeting his future wife, Stephen had been dating a girl for several years when she gave him an ultimatum: get married or break up. Stephen wanted to take a week home in Charleston to think it over. He told his mother the situation as soon as he got off the plane, and she made the decision easy. "Well, do you love her?" she asked. "I think so," Stephen told her, to which she replied, "I don't know isn't good enough." And just like that, Stephen's week was wide open. That week, he attended the Spoleto Festival USA in Charleston, a film festival, where he spotted Evelyn in the lobby and thought, "Her, that's your wife. You're going to marry her." Soon after meeting, they both realized they had grown up together in Charleston, had many mutual friends. They chatted for 2 hours, but Stephen started to worry that she was only being nice to him because their families knew each other and that she didn't really like him. Figuring he'd give her an out if she wanted to leave, Stephen turned away for what he described as the most harrowing minute of my life. But she was still there when I turned around, smiling at me. Evelyn revealed to the Montclair Local in 2021 that Stephen caught her eye on the night they met because of how he treated his mother. He walked in with his mother on his arm, and I was thinking, that man loves his mother. The two married in 1993 and moved to Montclair in 2000. They have 3 kids together. Now, Evelyn herself has a bit of a theater acting roles. She was featured in the comedy series Strangers with Candy, which was co-produced by Stephen and appeared in Alpha House. She's currently the vice president of Spartina Productions, a production company started by Stephen. She also works as an independent film producer for the company. Evelyn is also the president of the Montclair Film Board of Trustees. Evelyn has been involved with the Montclair Film Festival since its conception, with founder Bob Feinberg telling the Montclair local that she was his first call when he had the idea to start a film festival. In the years since, both Stephen and Evelyn have played significant parts in garnering publicity and raising money for the annual event. At the beginning of the pandemic, Stephen actually filmed The Late Show, first from his backyard, then from inside his Montclair home. A little fun fact there. Now I have to show you what is one of my favorite photos of the Colbert and McGee family. If you know Stephen Colbert, you know he's a big fan of J.R.R. Tolkien. So he was given the ability to cameo in one of the Hobbit movies that came out a few years ago, specifically The Hobbit: Desolation of Smaug. So he gladly took it up. So that's actually Stephen there in the boat. That's his wife, Evelyn, on the far right, and then two of their boys playing Lake Town spies in The Hobbit. And I just thought that was such an adorable photo of the family. I had to include it. Now, closer to home. Oh, no, I should say, first, we got some honorable mentions. We got an honorable mention here of Emily Blackwell and Elizabeth Cushier. I will explain why they're an honorable mention and they didn't just get their own slide, but a little bit of background. So Emily Blackwell, born in 1826. Blackwell, you may remember from my earlier slide. Yes, she is the sister of Henry Blackwell. Her older sister, Elizabeth, not Elizabeth Cushier, a different Elizabeth, became the first woman in the United States to earn a medical degree. Emily wasn't too far behind. She was the third woman to earn a medical degree, which she got from Western Reserve University. One author wrote, if Elizabeth was the humanitarian and reformer, Emily was the true physician. Elizabeth, her sister, founded the New York Infirmary for Indigent Women and Children, but it was under Emily's care that it became a full-fledged hospital and medical teaching college. The sisters had a combination home and sanitarium in Montclair during the Civil War. They would bring their patients out from the city and have them spend time on the wide veranda of the home to enjoy the fresh, clean air. Thanks to the new train stations in Montclair during this time, travel to and from the city was much easier, which is why they decided to have this sanatorium here in Montclair. Though she never married, Emily adopted a girl named Anna, who's also known as Hannah or Nanny. Now, Dr. Elizabeth Cushier was born in 1837. She entered medicine after a chance reading of an article about a physiological topic, which awakened an interest in her in the medical field. She went on to graduate from the Women's Medical College, which Elizabeth and Emily had founded earlier, and later became a member of its faculty. When she was elected a fellow of the New York Academy of Medicine in 1889, she was only the third woman to be invited into the academy. She became widely recognized as the leading woman surgeon during her time. Her practice was devoted to obstetrics and gynecology. Now, Dr. Mary Putnam Jacoby, a fellow female physician, wrote in 1888 to Elizabeth Blackwell, writing about Elizabeth Cushier. She is a remarkable, lovely woman, spirited, unselfish, generous, and intelligent. I do not know what Dr. Emily would do without her. She absolutely basks in her presence and seems as if she had been waiting for her for a lifetime. Now, Elizabeth Cushier and Emily Blackwell were domestic partners for 28 years, starting in 1882. They first lived in New York City and then split their time between Montclair at 17 Plymouth Street and York Cliffs, Maine. They both retired in 1900, shortly after the Women's College closed. Upon Emily's death, Dr. Elizabeth Cushier wrote, "Thus the years passed happily until in 1910, a sad blow came in the death of Dr. Blackwell, making an irreparable break in my life." Elizabeth continued to live in Montclair in Maine until she fell back into the medical field during World War I and undertook relief work in France and Belgium, and then volunteered her services to the Red Cross. Elizabeth died on her 94th birthday in 1931. While it's unclear whether Emily and Elizabeth had a romantic partnership, they were romantically involved. What is clear is that there was a real and true love between these two women. Unfortunately, I could not find a picture of Dr. Elizabeth Cushier, but that is a picture of Emily there. Now, this is a shot of our map from 1865, showing the property that Elizabeth and Emily had for their sanatorium. And you can see they are not too far from their sister-in-law, Lucy Stone, who you can see at the bottom there. They were practically neighbors at that time. I could not find a picture of that sanitarium. It is no longer there. The structure that they had there, it's no longer there, and I couldn't find any images of what it looked like. However, Henry Blackwell described it as a veranda with a house attached, Apparently had a long hallway that stretched from the front to the back to really allow for that air circulation, that fresh air, which brought them out from the city to the suburbs here. And the sisters, when they had patients out here, they made sure to have both white and Black patients. Now, not the same, not at that property, but the house that Dr. Elizabeth Cushier and Emily Blackwell lived at is here at 17 Plymouth, which you can see today. It's the same structure today. Now, lastly, I'll just wrap up here real quick. During my few years here at the Montclair History Center, I have discovered something interesting, that between the Montclair History Center and Montclair Community Farms, which is located on our property, it's been quite the love magnet here. Many couples have found love here. At least 3 that I know of have met here, between farmers and farm camp counselors, caretakers and staff members, and more. There's one couple I know that met here, and they have now been married for 20 years. And there are other couples that have used the History Center and Montclair Community Farms as a space to really grow a lot closer. So one example is our former executive director's Jane Elizoff, her daughter, was proposed to here on site at the gazebo. And that's actually a picture moments after the proposal happened. And she obviously said yes. And then personally, me and my husband volunteers on the hearth quite a lot. If you've ever come to a guided house tour, or whenever we've had our Crane House and Historic YWCA open, you may have run into him in the hearth kitchen, where he is often helping out on the fire and such. But we also have a brick in the brick patio there. We bought a little brick, and it says, Aaron and Nick, may our hearth fire burn forever, because I'm a sucker for puns always. So love is still blooming here in Montclair, and hopefully will continue to do so for years to come. That concludes my talk here. So let me stop share here. We've got a few minutes left. I didn't realize it'd go so late, so I apologize, but we do have some time if anybody has any questions that I can maybe answer, anything like that.
You can just unmute and just ask your question.
Excuse me, Aaron.
Yeah.
How did the heart actually become part of Valentine's Day? The actual, red shaped heart.
That is a great question. You know what? It's funny. The heart, that classic heart shape, which is not at all the shape of the human heart, is, it's so ingrained in our society that, you know what? I hadn't even thought to look into it. So I'm going to have to look into it. I feel like I read about it somewhere at some point, but I do not know. So I'm going to have to look into that. I'll have to get back to you, Mark.
Thanks.
I think my favorite fun fact is right from the beginning, the vinegar Valentine cards. I'm going to save that for its.
Aren't those fun?
I don't want to go Valentine.
I might have to print out some for myself. Not that I have many to give out, but still they're fun.
That's great. I never heard of that before. That was great to learn.
I did not realize that the Colberts had been in that movie. I knew he was a fan of that series, but I'd never seen that picture before.
Me either. Yeah.
It's real quick. I think it's like right at the beginning of the movie, and he's got an eye patch, so it's kind of hard, but the camera's right in his face, and he's like, so it doesn't even look like Steven. He's just like, I was an angry guy. And so it's very quick right at the beginning. I think it's the 3rd Hobbit movie. And I'm not actually sure. It's funny. I saw that picture, and I think his wife's role might have been cut, because I do not remember her, but it looks like she at least had something filmed. So I'll have to keep a closer eye out for her.
Yeah. Let's see.
I was just checking the chat. So nice comments, well researched, fantastic. Thank you, Aaron.
But now I'm gonna have to look into that heart, because now it's gonna bother me. I'm gonna do that right after this. I'm gonna look into the history of the heart shape.
You're going to have to add it to the YouTube. You're going to have to do a little addendum or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, does anybody know of any other famous Montclair couples that I hadn't thought of? There are a couple I didn't include just for time's sake, but does anybody know of any other Montclair couples that either just have a great love story or were pretty well known?
I can't say I do.
All right. If you do, please let me know, because this is something, if you watched my movie films and TV History at Home that I did a few months ago. I'm always looking to expand and add on this information and kind of compile it and keep a list going. So if anybody does think of somebody, it can be a personal relative, it can be, you know, somebody more famous, just, you know, if they've got a good classic love story, I'd love to have it. I'd love to add it to my list that I've got going.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Erin, so much. I think we learned a lot. A quick note for
great.
those still on, we're doing, Erin kind of mentioned this earlier, but we're doing a special feature, History at Home, we just added for next Thursday. And this is actually going to be regarding the history of the Lackawanna Terminal and Train Station. It's going to be hosted with Kathleen Bennett, who is chair of the Montclair Historic Preservation Commission. So 7 p.m., come on out if you'd like to learn about the history behind that space. It's a very important topic for Montclair's history right now. Thank you again, Erin. Great, wonderful things I learned. Wonderful.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
me too. That was great. Good
Very
job.
fun. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Erin. I was thinking you'll do Baroner's Wife.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's a great one. I'm going to write that down. Yes.
Yes, that is a good one. Thank you.
It
Jen.
is. Definitely.
And thank you, Laura, for the happy first Merry Valentine's Day. I appreciate that.
Yes.
Yogi and Carmen, yeah.
As soon as we hang up, everyone will think of someone.
I
Right,
know.
exactly.
Email us.
To say the email is mail@montclairhistory.org. You can find it on our website.
Right.
You can shoot an email right to that, and the subject says more couples to add or something like that. I'll find it. So
So, and Aaron, you could also maybe write a little letter to the editor of the Montclair Local. And, you know, there's got to be a host of like ministers and rabbis and, you know, clubs, you know, women's clubs, you know, other clubs, you know, where there is that synergy that somehow miraculously came together, that they may have a, you know, potentially cool story to tell.
oh yeah, exactly. Great idea. I should do that soonest, but you know, while we're still in the month of February, I should get that out there. Yes. All right. Well, anybody have any last questions or anything? All right.
It looks like we lost Angelica.
Oh, nope.
I'm still here.
Oh, there you are. There you are.
I
Sorry.
didn't get disconnected this time. Well, thank you, Erin. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night and tune in again next week for our next History at Home. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have
Thanks
a
a
great
lot.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Thanks, Sharon. Thank you.
You're welcome. And hopefully, well, you know, I'm glad you could hop on and stuff. All that.
It's fun, Erin.
Good.
Have a good
All right, well,
night.
Have a
Take
great
care,
night,
everyone.
everybody.